man, the skillful man. And it's going to take us right up into the river valley civilizations, and that being the Neolithic revolution. Therefore, we're going to cover a lot of time here. Okay. And again, change in this time is very slow, very, very slow. Okay. So this year, we're going to cover roughly 2 million years here. Okay.
Periods of history. The Bronze Age started in 3500 to 1000 BC, the Iron Age from 1000 BC to 1580, the Gunpowder Age from 1500 AD to 1945, and then the Nuclear Age from 1945 to the present day.
Good. So again, our period of history we're going to study when we get to Greece will be Bronze Age, okay, and the Iron Age as well, okay, when we get to Rome. Okay, so let's take a look at the Paleolithic era and some of the resources that were used.
Paleolithic industry, flint tools. The most used material to make weapons and tools during the Stone Age was flintstone. Paleolithic men made tools of carved stone to hunt and divide into pieces the animals they hunted. The spear top in the photo is at least 13,000 years old.
Yeah, so flint, a very common resource in the Stone Age or Paleolithic age. Flint, and you can see some of the tools used here. Okay, so here's an important slide for you. So the Paleolithic age explained inventions, art, and beliefs. Please, Sabrina.
So Paleolithic age inventions. There was the use of fire, rough tools such as stone, wood, or bone, weapons, spears, archers, and arrows, and canoes. And in art, it started during the Paleolithic, and there were cave paintings inside the caves. They painted mostly animals, bison, horses, mammoths, bulls, etc. And the most important cave paintings are in northern Spain, Altamira, and southern France, Lascaux. And they had beliefs, they had burials inside of caves, and the Venus of Willendorf, which was a symbol of fertility.
Yeah, that's this symbol right here. Yep. And this is the Lascaux cave here. And you can see some of the Paleolithic man using stone tools here. And again, Paleolithic, it just means Stone Age, right? Early Stone Age. And again, in your reading, you should have read and have to answer a question on Charles Darwin, right? So you should have learned about Charles Darwin last night, including his theory of natural selection, which is very important in the 1850s. Okay. Okay, now another big step. So make sure you write this down or you remember this. The Great Leap Forward, please.
The Great Leap Forward, which was 35,000 years ago. So there were two fundamental changes: the development of modern anatomy and the beginning of innovative behavior. There were more complex tools and more sophisticated tools, trade for raw materials and ornaments, and art, sculptures, paintings, and crafted objects for beauty and religion.
Good. So now the date here can change. Sometimes you'll get 35,000. In many books, you'll get 40,000 as the magic number. This is considered the Great Leap Forward. And remember these two important changes in human behavior, which is the beginning of innovative or new advanced behavior and technologies, and also the development of modern anatomy takes place around this time, 40,000 years ago. So you could see more complex tools, much more sophisticated weaponry, more trading. So yeah, this is a really important date here, 35,000 years ago. Okay, we could, scientists call this the Great Leap Forward for humans. If I'm going too fast, just tell me to stop or slow down. Okay. So what exactly happened at this time? Dina, please. Dina.
35,000 years ago, something remarkable happened known as the Great Leap Forward. Innovation and creativity, tools made of thin stone blades, spears, needles to make clothes, items for preparing food, and axes for cutting wood.
Good. Take a look at some of these axes and sharp objects. Having to fight off wild animals. Very difficult time. Let's move on to, okay. All right, my favorite. I love it. The Neolithic Age. So now we enter roughly 10,000 BC, and now we have another major revolution. Significant period, 10,000 BC. It's called the Agricultural Revolution, also known as the Neolithic Age or domestication. Okay, this is very important, so please copy this. So what exactly happened, Dina?
Why did it happen? Agricultural revolution, planting crops and new tools, wheat and barley, and domestication of animals like sheep, goats, pigs, and cows that gave meat, leather, milk, and etc.
Good. So agricultural and domestication of animals. Okay. And we're going to take a look at what the most important animals were at this time. Okay. Obviously, we have sheep, goats, and pigs and cows. Much easier to be domesticated compared to, for example, the zebra. The zebra was an animal that just had never been able to be domesticated. It's too anxious. It's a very nervous animal. And of course, wheat and barley being very popular at this time, grown in what was the bread basket of the world around this time? We call it Mesopotamia in ancient Iraq and Syria. Sarah, please, nice and loud. Neolithic Revolution explained.
Awesome. Okay. So Neolithic Revolution increases in global temperature after the last ice age, 13,000 YA. Discoveries about planting seeds led to the beginning of agriculture and domestication. People abandoned hunting and nomadic lifestyles. With a food surplus, world population increased dramatically. People began to build permanent homes and settlements. People began to realize that they could control nature and thus their food supply. Domestication equal food surplus. Domestication, process by which wild plant or animal species are bred under human control for the purpose of providing humans with a steady supply of food and raw materials.
Excellent, thank you. So lots of things happened. One was the increase in global temperature, okay, warming of our planet roughly 10,000 years ago. Okay. Discoveries of planting seeds, right?
Sir, I was just wondering, what is the
You cut out there. I don't know. You cut out.
Oh, sorry. I was wondering what the YA stood for.
Yeah, that's years ago.
Years. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So if sometimes you'll see MYA, that's millions of years ago.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. This is very important because when you have domestication, you have the development of towns and cities. What happens next is you have food surplus. Okay, it's no longer you're looking day to day for food to just survive, but now you have a food surplus. Okay, now that's very important, and I'm going to explain why in the next few slides. So the Neolithic way of life. So like I said, 10,000 years ago, now we have river valley civilizations. Okay. If I could take you to my map here. Okay. These are some of the first civilizations that we see around this time. And you can see these are all river valley civilizations in China, right? The Yellow River, the Indus Valley, you have the Indus River, you have Mesopotamia here, the Euphrates and the Tigris River, and you, of course, you have the famous Nile in Egypt. So these are our first river valley civilizations. Okay, so continue reading, Sarah.
Awesome. Neolithic way of life. Economical basis, agriculture and animal breeding. Inventions include agriculture tools improved, sickle made of flint blades, axes, buckets, etc. Domestication of animals, pottery and textiles, irrigation systems, wheels, improved tools, boats, trading, political organizations developed, and class system.
Good. Okay, so at this time, what makes this era different than the Paleolithic? Well, one is a big one, the irrigation system, right? The ability for humans to control water from rivers. Okay, rivers would increase and decrease. You would have flooding certain times of the year. Okay, so our ability to control water through irrigation system was a huge development. Also at this time, you get the development of wheels. Imagine what we can do with wheels, right? Improved tools, boats, trading with other civilizations. A political structure. Wow, political structure. Class structure, class systems. Pottery and textiles, which a lot of what we know through archaeology comes through pottery. And of course, domestication, new weaponry, and better agriculture, improved agriculture. This was a major change, major.
Yeah, sir. You know, the irrigation systems are really interesting.
Yes,
Like they're basically tunnels underground that bring water to the villages.
yes,
Like
I
in the
know.
Middle East.
We're going to look more, like we are going to study more in the next couple of days of the irrigation system. It is amazing what humans have done. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Again, I talked about the environmental changes, right? The warming of our planet, right? So, to summarize then, the difference I have in this chart here, the difference is here between paleo, new, and neo, meaning, neo meaning new and paleo meaning old. Look at the population change from 20 to 60 to now cities and towns up to 8,000. Okay. All because of domestication. Okay. Let's get a new reader. Who else wants to read? Stephanie. Stephanie wants to read. The Rise of a Civilization.
The rise of a civilization. Main idea: prospering agriculture villages, food surplus, and new technology led to the rise of civilization. Why does it matter? Agriculture led to larger, more organized communities that led to cities.
So characteristics of a civilization, Stephanie. When we say a civilization, whether that be Greece, Rome, Indian civilization, Chinese civilization, what do we mean, Stephanie?
We mean advanced cities, specialized workers, complex institutions, record keeping, advanced technology, social classes, varying wealth, power and influence beginning to emerge, organizing religion as populations grow, common spiritual values become lasting religion traditions.
Good. So these themes right here, these topics, is what a civilization is all about. Okay? Complex institutions, including the church, record keeping, advanced technology, specialized workers. Okay? People start to work in different areas, different occupations. Okay? So this is such an important point right here. So what happens after you get food surplus? What happens next?
After food surplus, it leads to increased population, diversity of new skills, political structure, expanded trade, and expanded of Sumerian society.
Good. And Sumerian society is really the first civilization that we have written records for. Okay. So we always start with Sumerian society in ancient Mesopotamia. This is where the wheel was created. Okay. But in order to get to our first civilizations, this is the path. One leads to the other. Okay. Copy that down. This is an important slide. I hope everyone's following me here. Please, when I ask you to take notes, or if I say a slide is very important, there's a reason. Okay, so make sure, again, you're taking notes, or maybe you're taking a picture of the screen, and copying notes. And of course, this is posted, so you can go back later. Okay. So let's take a look at our first villages, right? Our first villages. I showed you this image. Of course, these are the first 4 river valley civilizations. But let's take a look at some others, right? Farming developments in many places, right? Regions around the world are known for certain resources, right? They're known for certain foods. They're known for certain animals. So let's go through some of these regions. Let's get a new reader. How about David? Where's my buddy David? Good. Thank you so much. So notice I said Eurasia, right? And look at what Eurasia has: wheat, barley. They have sheep, goats, cows, pigs, and so important, horses, right? For travel, for war and conflict. And if we take a look at our map, you can see Eurasia, this area here. This is important because this is one big landmass where you can trade, right? Similar latitude. So you can trade from west to east. And there was lots of trading going on with your Eurasia. And what about some two old towns that that you've definitely heard of before, David? Please read. Good. Thank you. Of course, Jericho and Israel and the siege led by Joshua. You learn that in the Bible, right? In religion class. Okay, roughly 8,000 BC. And of course, lots happening in Turkey as well, right? A very central location. Okay. So we have lots of information from these two towns right after the Neolithic Revolution. Mexico and Central America, very known for the corn and squash and beans, come from this area. Peru, known for the potatoes, right? Sweet potatoes. I'll let you copy some of this down and then we'll move on. Okay, I'm going to move on from the PowerPoint now. Okay, if there's no questions. Okay, so I'm just going to show you something here, which relates to what we've just learned. It's going to be really, really interesting. It's from a historian, one of my favorites, named Noah Harari, and he wrote a great book. I had my class last year actually read this book. I had all of them get the book. It's called Sapiens. Some of you may have read it. Anyway, we're gonna learn about the author, and he's gonna take us much better than I can into this time. Okay, into this time. Oh, good. Some of you have read the book. Great. Okay, so oh, good, Edwin. Yes, yes. So let's watch. It's very interesting. So please, all of you, watch it. Okay, please. I'm gonna play it right now.
It's quite a feat. Our species, Homo sapiens, endured through the ages, overcame all other human species to become the dominant one. Author and history lecturer Yuval Noah Harari takes readers to this world in his book, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. And we welcome him to our program now. Hello, nice to meet you.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here.
We are going through a lot of history, hundreds of thousands of years, so let's get to it. I would say that we probably forget as we go about our daily lives that that Homo sapiens, we weren't the only human species on the planet. So tell us about the other humans that existed some 2.5 million years ago.
Yeah, humans first appeared on the planet about 2.5 million years ago, evolving from previous species of apes. And for most of that period, until about 10 or 20,000 years ago, there were always many different species of humans living side by side on the planet. For us, this sounds very strange because we are used to being the only human species around. And the thought that there could be humans from a different species strikes us as odd. But when you look at the other animals, this is the usual situation. If you look at bears, so you have in different parts of the world, different species of bears, like polar bears and grizzly bears and brown bears and black bears and so forth. So why not have different species of humans? And this was indeed a situation. If you went back, say, 50,000 years, you would have found our ancestors, Homo sapiens, in East Africa. But Europe was populated by a different human species, the Neanderthals. And other human species like Homo erectus, Homo denisova, and others populated different parts of Asia.
Well, I want to go through some of them, and we're going to bring up a couple of pictures. There's Homo rudolfensis. So let's go through a couple of them. Homo rudolfensis, Homo neanderthal, Lennis, and Homo erectus. What were the similarities between them? What were the differences?
Well, the similarities between all human species is that they all have relatively big brains. They all walk upright. They all know how to produce and to use tools. And all of them, until very recently, were unimportant. The most important thing to know about all these different species with the complicated Latin names is that none of them was really significant. Again, we're used to thinking about ourselves as the most important animal, most important factor on the planet. But until, say, 50, 70,000 years ago, humans were insignificant animals. Their impact on the ecological system was not greater than that of chimpanzees or woodpeckers or jellyfish.
Meaning what?
Meaning in the impact they have on other animals and other plants. They are, of course, very interesting animals. They used tools, they eventually used fire, but in terms of how they affected the lives, the behavior of other organisms, they were not especially important.
Meaning we weren't intrusive.
We weren't very intrusive. We weren't very destructive. Beginning about 50, 60, 70,000 years ago, one human species, our species, Homo sapiens, suddenly became extremely intrusive and extremely destructive and changed the face of the earth completely. This is not a new phenomenon of the last 200 years or so. If you go back 45,000 years ago, you will encounter the first big thing that Homo sapiens did in its career, and it was an immense ecological catastrophe when our ancestors first reached the continent of Australia. About 45,000 years ago, the result was the annihilation, the extermination of 95% of all the big species of animals in Australia. This is the first big thing that humans really did that influenced the earth. And
What
then
species was that did that?
What kind of species?
Yeah.
All kinds of giant kangaroos and giant snakes and giant, all kinds of other marsupials that became completely extinct within a very short time of the arrival of sapiens. The only ones left standing are the kangaroos we still see in Australia. But if you went back 50,000 years ago, you would have found a completely different Australia. And the same thing happened later in America. The second big thing that Homo sapiens did in its career was to destroy about 70% of all the big animals of America once our ancestors crossed over through the Bering Straits to Alaska and then Canada and so forth.
Okay, I want to take a step back because I want to talk about Neanderthals. It's a word we use all the time still. And we use it when we say it, we mean it in a derogatory way to mean someone who is, I don't know, uncivilized, brutish, dumb, all those sort of derogatory characteristics. In reality, how did they behave? Is there any reality in how we describe them to who they really were?
One thing we know for certain is that they had larger brains than us. They used tools, they used fire. Another thing we know for certain is that at least some of us have Neanderthal ancestors. I for one, people who come from the Middle Eastern ancestry or European ancestry have up to 4% of their genes coming from Neanderthal ancestors. This was a shocking discovery made only about 3 or 4 years ago when scientists completed the Neanderthal Genome Project and mapped ancient DNA extracted from fossilized bones of Neanderthals that lived about 40, 50,000 years ago. And the amazing discovery was that there was some fertile sexual intercourse between Neanderthals and sapiens about 40 or 50,000 years ago. And it's quite shocking to think that we Homo sapiens not only can have sex with an animal from a different species, we can actually have children together with an animal from a different species. So talking about, mixed families, 50,000 years ago, you might have found a child whose father was Neanderthal and whose mother was a sapiens. And this child may be the ancestor of me or
So our different species of humans were crossing paths?
Yes, there was some crossing of path, even though it was only to a limited extent. And the overarching development was that once Homo sapiens started to spread out of its initial habitat in East Africa, the other human species disappeared, probably because most of them were driven to extinction by our ancestors. There was a little, mixed marriages or mixed couples, but most of the population of Neanderthals and Homo erectus and so forth, they were driven to extinction.
How? What happened to the Neanderthals?
We don't know for sure. We don't know if they were killed violently on purpose by the sapiens, or if there was simply competition for the same resources. Sapiens and Neanderthals hunting the same bison and gathering the same mushrooms and berries, and the sapiens simply were better at it. So over the generation, you had more and more sapiens and fewer Neanderthals. It's one of the big ifs of history. What would have happened if Neanderthals or other human species somehow managed to survive alongside sapiens instead of becoming extinct? And just try to imagine the world of today with Neanderthals, if in addition to all the other divisions between rich and poor, Muslims and Christians and so forth, you also had this fundamental division between sapiens and Neanderthals. It must have changed the entire worldview of human beings.
I'm not sure that I want to actually think about what our world might look like with that, given all the chaos that's going on. I want to take a step back with you because you say your DNA, given your background, contains, and other humans obviously carries Neanderthal DNA, some of it. Mm-hmm. What are the implications of that as we live now?
I think there are two main implications. One is that it narrows down the gap between us and the other animals. Especially people coming from monotheistic background have this idea that humans are special, humans are unique, they are the apex of creation, and there is an unbridgeable gap between us and all the other animals. According, for example, to Catholic dogma, only humans have souls. All the other animals, all the chimpanzees and gorillas and whatever, they don't have soul. But once you realize that actually, at least some of us, have both Neanderthal and sapiens ancestors, it serves as a bridge between us and the other animals. Again, if you come to the Pope and ask him, what is the status of such a child born from a Neanderthal father and a sapiens mother? Does he have soul? Does somebody with a soul can be born from somebody without a soul? These are interesting questions on the philosophical level. On a more dangerous political level, these kinds of study may give a new lease of life to racist theories. Because previously, in the last few decades, the common wisdom was that all humans, without exception on planet Earth today, come from exactly the same ancestors that left Africa about 70,000 years ago. But these new findings actually mean that people in different places in the world have somewhat different genetic background, and say Europeans have Neanderthal genes that you don't find in African DNA and so forth. And this goes back hundreds of thousands of years. Now, at present, we don't know what these Neanderthal genes are responsible for, and this is really a political minefield. So scientists say, oh, they are not very important. They mostly have to do with things like immunity to local diseases and to local weather. But if eventually it turns out that these unique Neanderthal gene or Denisovan genes or whatever have an impact on emotional, cognitive abilities and so forth, this is really political dynamite.
We could find another divisions amongst our societies and use it to our advantage and disadvantages. Okay, here we are in 2015. If an alien came and watched us go about our daily lives, all they'd see us is running around and being very busy, and we all like to say how busy we are. I'm wondering, take me back, what was daily life like for the average Homo sapien?
Say 50,000 years ago. It was in many ways much more relaxed than life today. One of the big differences is that people lived in the present, and people lived completely connected to their senses and to the sensory world of sensations inside their bodies and around them. They're extremely aware of every sound, of every smell, of everything they saw, of everything they tasted, because their survival depended on that. They lived in the present moment.
How do you know that? How do we know that about them?
We know that partly from observation of hunter-gatherers that survived to the modern age and that still survive even today in remote places. Secondly, we know that by observing our cousins, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, so forth. There is a significant amount of speculation involved, but based on archaeological records from that time, from say 40, 50, 60,000 years ago.
Okay. So what you're saying, because again, I think we have a stereotype of hunter-gathering societies, that there was violence on one side and then this sort of, peaceful existence on the other. But what you're saying is that life was pretty peaceful for hunter-gatherer societies. They were really living in the moment, doing what they needed to do to survive, but overall pretty zen.
Peaceful, I wouldn't say. There were, of course, a lot of dangers. This is why they had to be alert all the time. Today, we don't need to be alert because most of the time there is no danger. It's not like a lion is about to pounce on us, or a snake is lurking in the grass. So we have to be very aware of every sound and every smell. They had to be extremely aware because of the dangers around. And also, there is evidence that there was considerable amount of violence between people. 40, 50, 60,000 years ago. It was far from paradise, but in many respects, their lives were better than the lives of most people after the agricultural revolution. And first of all, because their jobs were more interesting and and their bodies and minds were more adapted to what they were actually doing. the bodies and minds of Homo sapiens evolved for hundreds of thousands of years in adaptation to life as hunter-gatherers, climbing trees to pick apples and running after gazelles and going to the woods to look for mushrooms. Once you have agriculture, you see that most people, from sunrise to sunset, they dig canals, they bring water from the river, they reap the corn, they grind the corn, and you see it in skeletons that this caused a lot of injuries and a lot of difficulties on the bodily level. And also on the mental level, it's far less interesting to dig a canal all day than to go look for mushrooms. Even today, if you think about most people on the planet are doing, like the person who may have sewed this sweater someplace in Bangladesh or I don't know where, his or her life working 12 hours shifts near a machine in a polluted factory. You compare that to going to the woods to look for mushrooms, it doesn't sound such a big progress. And on top of that, the diet of most people before the agricultural revolution was significantly better. Hunter-gatherers subsisted by eating dozens of different species of animals and plants and mushrooms and berries and so forth, so they got all the nutrients and vitamins they needed. Farmers, after agriculture came, subsisted mainly by eating a single crop, like rice in East Asia or wheat in the Middle East. So their nutrition was far worse. And on top of that, they suffered far more from exploitation and social hierarchies. Only with the agricultural revolution do you begin to see the formation of small elites of kings and priests and soldiers that control and exploit masses of peasants and workers. So from all these perspectives, it seems that the life of the hunter-gatherers, maybe 50,000 years ago, were, at least in some respects, much better than the lives of most people that came after them.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then. Is this, sort of observation based on hindsight? Because, I mean, if things were so good in hunter-gatherer society, or at least comparatively better than what came after, why was there this transition from hunter-gathering into agriculture?
There are several reasons. First of all, you have demographic and ecological pressures, but most basically of all, you have mistakes. History is full of mistakes. Some of the most important decisions in history turn out later to be mistakes because people find it extremely difficult to forecast the future accurately. They can maybe understand the short-term consequences of their decisions, but not the long-term consequences. When people shifted from hunting and gathering to agriculture, it didn't happen in a day. It wasn't like they had a big gathering and somebody suggested, let's start planting wheat, and everybody voted and said, okay, tomorrow morning we start agriculture. It wasn't like that. It took generations of small steps, and every one of these steps looked like a good idea at the time, but nobody was in a position to understand the long-term implications of things like demographic growth. People thought that, yes, we will have more food because we will cultivate wheat or rice or potatoes, but they didn't take into account that you will have many more people and that the nutrition will actually be much worse and that you will be far more exposed to things like drought, like flooding, like bad weather. Hunter-gatherers, if there is some natural calamity, like a drought, then yes, life is worse. But if some plants don't grow like last year, you always have other options. With farmers, if the yearly harvest of wheat or rice is down, there is no other option, and you have mass starvation.
And you mentioned earlier that hunter-gatherer societies weren't as intrusive on other animals, and then you talked about the move to Australia and the impact that had. Describe the impact that the agricultural revolution then had on other animals.
Well, the most important impact was the appearance of a completely new kind of animal, which is domesticated animals. The cow, the chickens, the pigs, and so forth, which never existed before on the planet, and which today is the dominant life form on Earth, at least if you think about large animals. If you look at animals, say, from the level of penguins and upwards, and you count the animals on the planet, you will see that more than 90% of the big animals on the planet are domesticated animals. To give just a few statistics, we have about 200,000 wolves all over the world, just 200,000 wolves, compared with 500 million domesticated dogs. We have 80,000 giraffes and 1.5 billion cattle. We have 50 million penguins and 50 billion chickens. That's 1,000 chickens for every penguin. So they are the dominant life form in terms of numbers, and they are also probably the most miserable animals that ever existed on the planet. If you did a competition, who is the most miserable animal ever to exist on Earth, I think the gold medal will be hotly contested between the chickens, the cows, and the pigs, because we have made their lives basically hellish. We treat them as merely machines for the production of eggs and milk and meat, and completely ignore their physical and psychological and social needs.
And all this change is coming about during the agricultural revolution. Something that you call, this is an interesting term that you use, history's biggest fraud.
Yeah. This is actually lifted from Jared Diamond, who coined this phrase maybe 20 years ago. And the idea is that people thought that it was a good idea. People today also look back at the agricultural revolution and think it was a big step forward. And in terms of the collective power of humankind, it was certainly a big step forward. Without agriculture, you could not have cities and kingdoms and empires and so forth. But if you look at the life of the individual, then I can say that until about, say, 1800, agriculture for most individuals was bad news. The average person 200 years ago, a Chinese peasant, a Welsh coal miner in Victorian in England, they lived worse life than their ancestors 20, 30,000 years ago. Over the last 200 years, we did see for the first time real progress in terms of the daily life of the average individual, with the reduction in the prevalence of disease, of famine, and eventually even of war. But this is only a phenomenon of the last 200 years, and it was accompanied by less positive developments, like what I was talking about earlier, the loss of attention. Over the last 200 years, humans in advanced societies basically lost the ability to pay attention to the present moment and to their senses. And in addition, you saw the collapse of their family and of the intimate community as a result of the Industrial Revolution and the rise of the state and the market. So people today live a much more comfortable lives, but also much more lonely and alienated lives.
Well, let me ask you about that, because I want to jump ahead a little bit in the sense of where Homo sapiens are today and where we may be going. So we talked about Neanderthals, how they were died off or killed off. In terms of Homo sapiens, I mean, could we ever evolve into something else?
This is very likely, actually. I think that within, say, 200 years, to give a conservative estimate, there won't be Homo sapiens on planet Earth.
200 years?
200 years, and I think this is a conservative estimate.
Wow.
Maybe even 100 years. It's not that we'll destroy ourselves in some calamity, much more quickly, we will use advanced technology, biotechnology, nanotechnology, direct brain-computer interfaces to upgrade Homo sapiens into different kinds of beings, which are different from us, much more than we are different from Neanderthals. Beings which will have different bodies, different minds, different brains. I mean, the big products of the coming century will not be shoes or clothes or cars or weapons. The big products of the 21st century are going to be bodies and minds. So I think we are heading towards the upgrading of Homo sapiens into gods.
I mean, what you're suggesting is that our future holds, with bioengineering and technology, will make natural selection obsolete.
Obsolete, yeah. We'll replace natural selection by intelligent design. you have, especially in the US, this big argument between natural selection and intelligent design. And the funny thing is, the ironic thing is that the people who believe in natural selection, I think they're obviously right about the past. But the people who believe in intelligent design, they are right about the future. The future of life belongs to intelligent design, but the designers, the intelligent designers, will not be some gods above the clouds. We are going to be the intelligent designers of the future of life in the universe.
We have to end our conversation, but I want to ask you one more thing. It's a big question. I mean, we've been through millions of years of history in about 25 minutes. And so here's the big question, I guess. What are we to take away from all of this? I mean, are we supposed to long for a time gone by? But I mean, what are we supposed to sort of take away from all this?
We can't go back. This is very, very obvious. At the time of the hunter-gatherers, there were 7 million people on Earth. Now there are 7 billion. You cannot feed 7 billion people by hunting and gathering. I think the main thing we can learn from hunter-gatherers is to try to live in the present, to see reality as it is, to accept reality as it is, and to work with it. The main problem of humans is that we are extremely good in acquiring power, but we don't deal with it, and we too often misuse our power. So we become ever more powerful, but we aren't becoming any happier. And I think that the key to really succeed in translating power into happiness is to find a moment, not to think continuously about what will happen in the future, but to understand what is happening right now and what are the sources of our suffering, of our misery on the level of the here and now.
We know what to do. We just need to do it, is what you're saying. Uval, thank you. We'll talk with you again tomorrow. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay. I really hope you enjoyed that. Okay. Very interesting. I posted the video here in our Google Class. Okay. If you want to buy his book, it's called Sapiens. You are not required to buy it for this course, but if you want to, it's called Sapiens. Okay. Okay. I hope you enjoyed the video, guys, and hopefully everybody's back. Let's take. Would you guys like a break, a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll move on? How does a 5-minute break sound?
Sounds good.
Okay, good.
Sorry, I had a question.